So I see that we've got quite a few more folks joining us. I'm excited to see some new faces here on the screen as well. I will open up chat in just a moment so folks can chat. And as always, I'll also tell you that if you put your responses into Q&A, we'll answer those Q&A questions throughout the meeting. For those that are attending our coaching for the first time, this is something we do every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, noontime on the West Coast, really to bring out different topics or different areas of VCIO toolbox that we go in more depth than you may have during onboarding training or by yourself. As part of this process, what we're really trying to do is make sure that you're getting some of the education, not only on how to utilize the tool in a more expanded fashion, but also how to really build out your VCIO and VCSO programs. So you're going to see a lot of messaging around that from us throughout this year, and hopefully some of that is something you can incorporate into your own plans. For anybody that doesn't know me, I am Brian Doyle. I am one of the co-founders here at VCIO Toolbox, and I do run these trainings weekly. So to kick things off, let's just talk a little bit about the difference between what is a TBR or QBR and what is a VCSO service. These terms get often intertwined and are used the same way. Another problem that I see is also a lot of people are giving away what could be a for-fee VCIO service as part of their existing service contracts and QBR services that they're providing to their customers. So let's focus on TBR first. So the TBR, very simply put, is a periodic event we're doing with our customer to stay engaged, right? In these sessions, we're really trying to better understand where our customer's trying to go with their business, drive some value by illustrating some of the things that we do for them and the business outcomes that we're driving. And certainly there are some core components in that process. A lot of times we'll do some strategic planning with them, whether that be overall business planning or just IT planning. That's really up to you. I'd say in most TBRs, we should be staying a little bit more focused on IT, of course. We'll undertake a current gap analysis. So we're going to do an assessment of some sort or look at the metrics that are coming in from various tools to really identify where there are gaps in process, system, security, and training within the customer's environment. And then finally, we're going to get to some level of life cycle management to generate kind of that low-hanging fruit with any renewals or refresh cycles that we have to do. And that will then help us generate our roadmap to the customer. So I think all of us here on this call especially are very familiar with what the QBR process, TBR process looks like. But let's talk a little bit about how we can expand on that and really build an as a service offering. So one of the core differences is that VCIO and VCSO services are really continuous services. Now, an argument can be said that obviously if I'm in the VCIO role for a customer and I'm conducting my quarterly business reviews, I'm going to be an advocate throughout the year for them. But still at the end of the day, unless I'm probably being reactionary to something that they're requesting from me, I'm managing this quarterly business review process as my proactive approach. When I'm over here in the VCI or VCSO column, here I'm really working on continuous-based services and making sure I'm staying engaged throughout the year with the customer. And this is also one of the core differentiators on what you can give away as part of a service contract versus what really should be part of a more effective program with a cost. Now, obviously, running a VCIO or VCSO service are going to incorporate the elements of the TBR as part of that process. You're going to build a strategic plan, do that gap analysis, build a roadmap as part of your VCSO service. But now you're really going to bring some strategic leadership to bear in this process as well. Now we'll get a little bit deeper into the core deliverables in just a couple moments, but really there we want to become part of their executive team. In most cases, if a customer is coming to us to be a fractional VCIO, it's because they do not have a CIO in their organization, and that gap might be stifling innovation or progress within their business. We need to have a 360 view of the organization when we get in this role. We really need to understand not only what is the technology doing, but what is the business trying to achieve and where does technology intersect? And of course, once we get to this level, we're contributing to policy and process that's running that organization as well. And we really want to help form that. So this is kind of a little difference on where kind of the QBR, TBR process may stop and where you start heading into the VCSO services. And obviously, if you're seeing that some of what we have on the VCSO column, you're giving away as part of your TBR, you may want to assess whether or not that's something that you can work with the customer to convert into a for-fee process, or if you can scale that effort down because you might be going beyond really what you're getting paid for. So just some food for thought there. But again, on the left-hand side, it's included in most contracts. And on the right-hand side, we're really talking about new MRR opportunities for you as the service provider. Now, why would a customer need these services? Well, there's some common challenges that are facing small to mid-sized business leaders everywhere. They need better business results, right? I don't think you'll walk into any business where they are not concerned about better outcomes, reducing cost, generating profit, and they need technology to help them innovate. Those days of it being a cost center that they can accept is no longer there. They want to know how they can become more efficient with these projects, how they can incorporate some of the new and emerging tools into this process, and certainly, get better outcomes for the overall business. And if we're going to be in this to win it with the customer, we got to show sticky ways that we're helping them drive that. Now, another concern, of course, and this will never go out of style. I always say this, right? Security never goes out of style. There are emerging security threats that the customer has to be, consider as they go through this process. These threats, continue to evolve. The hackers are always one step ahead of us, and we have to not only have a way to potentially identify and detect these processes and of course, kick off remediation, but what are we doing up front to mitigate this? Are we putting together a governance plan to make sure that we're doing the steps regularly that we need to do in order to keep security, or keep our organization safe? So that's something that we need to consider when we build out our programs as well. Most of these companies have a skills gap, whether you're in a direct affiliation where you are the IT service provider and you're fulfilling that skills gap, or they're running their own IT department, but there's skills gaps within it. They are short on professionals that can serve them. And we need to fill those gaps. We do it very well from a service provider standpoint, but are we doing it from a leadership standpoint? And we talked about innovation. So when you really think about why these customers need guidance, it's really simple, right? Security never goes out of style. Those threats will continue to emerge. We've got innovation that we need to bring to a customer. New things like artificial intelligence are something that they're looking to figure out how they can harness within their business. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. And certainly that affords the MSP a great opportunity to become more proficient in those skills and be the leader in that area. And then, of course, there's that continued assessment of workflow, productivity, tools, and efficiency, right? That happy balance of those things. And how do you get more out of less? How do you take human capital and get the most out of them by not having them struggle with technology or reallocating them to other roles and letting technology replace them in the low-level roles that they may have occupied before? So these are common challenges that are facing the business community today. Now, another thing that I kind of touched upon is the resource imbalance. This is especially true when you're in a co-managed situation. The scale tends to flow one way or another for these companies. That if they have leadership in their business or somebody that's been tasked with leadership, they tend to either be a technical leader or a strategic leader, but they don't offer up both sides of that equation. So we really need to figure out where we've got to fill those gaps and what resources we need to put to it. And certainly if they're struggling with leadership, strategy, definition of where they need to go, that's where a VCIO or VCSO service can come into play. Now, what is the role of the virtual chief information officer? And look at that cool logo I got up in the left-hand side. But anyhow, putting that aside, you'll see that the virtual chief information officer is really there to bridge the gap between strategy and operations for a business and to drive better outcomes. So if we really look at what does a VCIO do from a strategy perspective, a lot of these may be obvious to you. We want to be a better strategic planning resource. We certainly want to help the customer with business to technology alignment. How are we going to drive those better outcomes I keep referring to? We then want to take that plan and develop it into a technology roadmap so we can map out both tying to priority, need, benefit, and the big one, budget, so we can ascertain what needs to be done first and what's going to be done a little bit later in the process. And policy and procedures is really an area that, as more and more of our customers are being bound by regulatory action, that's an area that's really tends to lag behind, hasn't been reviewed regularly. Policies and procedures could be 10 years old and don't even speak to today's emerging cyber landscape. So we need to really be part of that and leading the way on those 4 items. When we're working with the customer's operational teams, though, now we're taking a different tact. We're going to be the IT leadership partner. We want to work with various groups within the business to understand what they're trying to achieve and see where technology can help and support that. We then want to communicate that information to the C-suite, and again, that might translate into strategy at that stage, but make sure they know what's going on. Certainly, we should be a part of vendor selection. I remember the days in the early 2000s when we were launching our MSP, and we'd get excited when we'd find out the customer would buy a new application because, hey, man, that means we're going to deliver server and hardware and all kinds of other stuff to them. Now, if we're not part of vendor selection, we may inherit a headache that we have to support. We may have applications that don't integrate with our authentication methods. We may find out security is not meeting what the overall security program's dictating. So we really need to insert ourselves operationally and be part of that selection process when we're acting as the virtual chief information officer. You'll see a very similar concept going with performance reporting. We need to look at those vendors and look at the infrastructure and look at the different assets that are going to maintain the operations and make sure that we're getting the performance we need and taking those reports and putting them into business vernacular that our customers can understand. And certainly while we're doing all this at all levels of the organization, we should be doing some level of coaching to really help them move forward. So you can see it's a very happy balance, even though, the VCIO perceptionally, especially in a fractional arrangement, is looked at as a strategic resource. You do need to balance that with an operational perspective. Now, hey, my logos aren't updated everywhere today. But let's also talk about the mindset you need when you're in this fractional VCIO role. Well, you need to really think about how you're working with each one of the groups within the business. When you're working with executive leadership, what is the messaging you're taking there? And it really should be about driving the ball forward, getting business achievement and outcomes that the client requires. When you're dealing with finance teams, it's really a question about how do we optimize the spend we have. Now, I'm not necessarily saying let's go in there and try to reduce costs. It's getting an agreement with the finance teams on what is going to be spent there and showing them a path to return on investment very quickly and showing them how they could potentially reduce other areas of costs by leveraging technology and harnessing it there. When we need to understand security best practices and bring that forward. I've spoken a lot about that today, so I'm going to go past that because we're going to get back to it in the VCSO conversation in our call today. But you can see very quickly that we need to be in tune there. And an area that I see most MSPs overlooking is business operations and really getting an understanding of what is the customer doing from the day to day. For those of you on this call that use VCIO Toolbox, this is a big part of what the business canvas model located in the CAM can do for you. There, we're doing a 360 view of the customer. We want to understand how they go to market, what resources they use to go to market with, and how they're going to satisfy supporting their clients. And we want to look and see if we could take the existing technologies we're doing and optimize that to support that. On the other side of the equation, we want to understand how they're supporting things operationally. And do we have any security gaps that might not come out in a traditional framework assessment that we need to address? Are there any things that we can better optimize by bringing in new technology? So we really want to understand and listen to those people that are operating the different lines of business within the organization so we can make better and stronger decisions long term. And we really get a little deeper into that when we show how a VCIO or VCSO should be working with your team, right? When we're working with the CEO, we've just got to be thinking what is important to this person and in this person. It's how to maximize profits for their shareholders, how to maximize profits for their business, how to have a more efficient, growing, healthy business overall, right? The CFO, they want long-term strategic plans. They don't want surprises. They want to be able to put together budgets and priorities and base things on timelines. So the more information we can get them up front, the longer we can build out a roadmap that's logical for them, the better they're going to be able to get those vehicles that they need to execute. If we're working as the IT team, obviously we're going to be the entirety of this role. But if we're working in a co-managed situation, we need to insert ourselves into the IT team. And generally that's, if that's as a strategic leader, it's understanding those vendor relationships, making sure we're maximizing what we can get out of those relationships, and that we're not missing any opportunities for improvement with the tools that we have today. If we're more in the tactical side of that, then we want to understand where can we build efficiencies in at the system level and guide our MSP teams to do so. Now, I touched upon this just a moment ago when I was talking about kind of the business side of things, but we really want to get to know those line of business managers. And these are probably the most overlooked people when you're in a mid-sized, upper small to mid-sized organization. These are the people whose teams are actually doing the work and are working daily with the technology we supply. We want to understand where the challenges are there, where they feel like there's productivity losses occurring because of technology. If we want to understand what problems they're facing, so maybe we can come back to them and show them where there's opportunities to innovate and really build for the future as well. And then, of course, we should always have a pulse on the end user community. At the end of the day, we all know the old adage, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? And a lot of us know that we have some customers that call into our service desk that might be some of the lower people on the totem pole within the client environment, but they are the people that are noisiest, so thus our help desk responds quicker. And when we're really looking at this, we want to make sure that we understand what that community is all about, because they are a key stakeholder potentially in our existence within that environment. If they squawk enough, we may find ourselves on the wrong side of the door looking in. Now let's kind of transition a little bit into the VCSO model, right? So I've talked a little bit about the VCIO, and that can be a leadership standalone process. And we're going to talk a little bit more about packaging and pricing at the end of this call. But we've got the VCIO kind of taking that lead dog piece. Now, depending on the tool set of that VCIO, they potentially could fulfill this VCSO role, where this VCSO role might be a team-based approach to providing a service which incorporates some leadership. But here's the real reality. Small to mid-sized companies, and I've said it before, are seeing the same cyber threats as large enterprise corporations. The days of saying that can't happen to me are no longer, right? Because we can be a byproduct of a breach that happens to one of our upstream providers, or we could just have bots looking for vulnerabilities and dropping us in, because quite frankly, for the hackers, any kind of payday is a payday, small or large, right? So if they can get in there, drop some ransomware, knock us offline, and make a few dollars, they're going to do so. Another thing that is really starting to become part of the cyber liability conversation is, what is that data you're holding? And a lot of our customers have never really thought about the identifiable information that they're holding, whether it's for their customers or even just their internal employees. And please don't take that statement, just their internal employees, as anything more than they overlook that employee portion of it sometimes. But those people are all equal in the type of information they have in causing damage to their reputation risk, or actually their credit scores and things like that, should that data get out. So we really want to make sure that we've got a right program to retain that data. And obviously litigation insurance, it's becoming more difficult, and if you're watching out in the marketplace, claims are being rejected, and more importantly, they're starting to become fraud cases for insurance, where people just checked the box when they were obtaining insurance, took that payment when they did have a breach, and then it was uncovered that they were negligent. These things were before just a refund type experience. Now they're being brought forward in some cases as fraud. So keep an eye on that as well. Key drivers for the VC. So, customers that need compliance done, that's an obvious one, right? If I'm regulatory bound, I probably need a true VCSO program, whether it's internal or external within my business. The complexity of requirements in getting cyber liability, though, is driving a lot of the SMBs to taking on a framework like NIST CSF 2.0 or CIS version 8, and really making sure that they're building a security posture and building a security program to make cyber liability insurance easier to obtain and hopefully lower cost at the premium level as well. Obviously they need to protect themselves from the dangers within their employees, right? So we've got to have our security awareness training. We've got to have our policies there. But more importantly, who's making sure that those things are being adhered to and the training is being done? And that's something where we can fill in as a formalized VCSO in an environment. Finally, and we kind of covered on this already, the specter of litigation is becoming bigger. So what are the responsibilities of a VCSO in an engagement, and how can we create monthly recurring revenue in the VCSO role? Well, simple, there's really three key areas that we're going to look at: people and policies, architecture and tools, and then ultimately compliance and management, right? So when we look at people and policies here, we're really talking about going in and doing a policy and procedure review. Are the procedures enforced for the IT department today adhering to security best practices? Do we have any back doors that we don't know about that we need to shore up? What are the procedures for onboarding, and then more importantly, termination and exit? We need to see how the company's operating and where those security gaps might live, and then we've got to reinforce it with IT policy, which may exist or may need to be created. And of course, that would potentially be done hand in hand with the the HR departments as well. We need to look at gaps in existing skills. Now, again, if we're the total outsourced IT department, we better be filling those gaps. But what are the gaps in leadership skills? What are the gaps in skills in reporting and measurement? Are there people on that team that can act as the security officer internally for the organization? And what do we need to bring to them in terms of professional development or training to help them in that role? And that's something that a VCSO needs to undertake when they engage in this role. And then, of course, we need to look at the cyber training and incident communication programs and make sure that things are being adhered to and meet the need. As you know, probably the majority of our customers that are running security programs themselves, that we are just really acting as the support mechanism for them, those folks probably do not have bona fide business continuity plans. They certainly probably haven't done their tabletop testing and really making sure they're identifying where they can improve those plans as well. And that's a place you can insert yourself and build some MRR opportunity as well. When we talk about architecture, tools, and training, again, if you're being the MSP or the MSSP serving them, you're going to be bringing those tools to them. So some of the things that you see here would be internal things you should be doing for your own business, right? Making sure that the security architecture meets the needs of those businesses. But if you're inheriting tools from a customer or you're in a co-managed situation, this is where you really got to step in and make sure they've got the right tools and voice that opinion as part of that leadership agreement. In terms of tools for threat identification and visibility, we got to make sure that the tech's there. Again, if we're acting in that role, we better have tech that's supporting it. But if we're inheriting the customer's tools, we got to see where those gaps exist. And if we do see gaps, we got to make recommendations to the customer. So what do these programs really look like? And I think I might have missed a slide there, but yeah, the advisory piece of it. And let's just talk about this real quick. And this is obviously where it intersects very much so with VCIO Toolbox and our GRC module. When you come into the advisory area, you're looking for readiness against compliance requirements like HIPAA, ISO, and NIST, right? But as we mentioned earlier, if customers are really looking to build a security program to support just cyber liability requirements or just be good corporate stewards of the information they control, we're going to pick one of those frameworks and potentially work to that. So we're seeing a lot of adoption of CIS version 8 and NIST CSF within our client base. We want to look at best practices for managing those gaps. We got to build that plan of action. And as you know, in VCIO Toolbox, we'll marry that plan of action to the technology roadmap that's being developed potentially on the QBR side. So we make sure that we've got that unified plan for the customer. We know what those timelines are and we know what the outcomes are going to be. And that's something the VCSO needs to work with and communicate to the client. And that future state plan is going to lead them in executing on the plan. We've also got to have the backbone to stand up against our customers. And if pure budget is not the problem, we've got to make sure they're taking the action as agreed upon as part of the plan of action. Otherwise, we might find ourselves finding things a little bit more difficult down the road. Now, how can we build out these services? So I'm going to show you two models here, guys, today. One for fractional VCIO and fractional VCSO. Rates are regional. You can argue with my rates. You can go with your rates. And the budgets are showing the low end of the program to the high end of the program. So I want to be very clear there. When you look over on the left-hand side, and this being specifically for the fractional VCIO, what you're really seeing in the remote column is what we should be doing under our standard managed service contracts. That, as far as I'm concerned, is the TBR model, right? We're providing strategic technology roadmaps. We're doing quarterly meetings that could be biannual or annual, depending on the customer. And we're providing some level of monthly performance reporting. Even if we're not doing that performance reporting externally, we're reviewing those reports internally, looking at the customer status and seeing if we need to do anything. Now, we have an estimate of about 8 hours included there. That's because once upon a time, as many of you might know, I ran a fractional VCIO firm, and these were our plans. So that 8 hours, if I was not an MSP, would have been what I would have been charging that customer on a monthly basis to do that work. Now, as you move up the food chain, we start layering on different services. When we get to the business service, this still assumes it's a small to mid-sized business client, and we insert ourselves maybe into weekly IT staff calls and have those regular touch bases. We want to be part of that vendor performance review. As we move into the executive layer, we might now be, crossing over into larger scale, fully outsourced organizations into co-managed organizations. And now we're starting to build in regular attendance at leadership and board meetings to make sure that we're filling that CIO vacancy. And we're also being there for bi-monthly visits or remote meetings, making sure the team is staying on task and projects are not falling behind, and any steps that we're taking against security are being executed. And then finally, when we get up to the first class region, this is really where we're building in a full our VCIO. We're taking over the full leadership position. Now we're doing one-on-ones with and this is usually a co-managed column over there. We're doing the one-on-ones with the different technical resources or their leadership. And then we're doing staff 360 reviews, so it's not being done by business people. And don't shortchange that opportunity, because one of the challenges both for the business owner and the technical resource who's managed by a non-technical resource is their reviews oftentimes are rubber stamped, or they don't know how to really assess the individual's performance and might undervalue it. So if you want to create that win-win situation that retains good employees, you want to make sure that you've got somebody proper doing those 360 reviews, and that's where a fractional VCIO can certainly fit into the equation. Now, from there, we can move into the VCSO role. And in a lot of my customers, you're really stacking this onto a potential fractional VCIO relationship. It is slightly different. Here we have more technical resources. Some of this might even be baked in to some of your MSSP services, so you might look at considering a change in the hour layouts we have here too. But the opportunity here is really simple. Again, under your standard service contract, I think you'd want to do some policy and procedure review just to make sure that they exist out there. And obviously, we want to do annual threat identification and information sharing reviews. For those of you that are part of CompTIA, I know for the MSP, the ISAO is at no cost to you. I strongly recommend you utilize that resource. It's going to even help you with your own cyber liability insurance, but we'll cover off on that on another meeting. As we move up the food chain, when you get to the business layer, this is really where we're starting to build that for-fee service to the customer. So there we've got annual architecture reviews being looked at as part of this process. We're going to build in a framework to assess to, even if that's just to make sure that we're maintaining a strong security program. And then we're going to build out our plan of action. When I get to the executive layer, this is where we're taking on a more expansive role. And now we're layering in that regular attendance to meetings, being part of that on-site. This is where tabletop exercises should come into play. And you should have at least biannual tabletop exercises to, and I'm going to use that word again, exercise your response plan and see where room for improvement can be. We're going to start looking at gap assessments for skills at the employee and staff level that are part of those security teams. And then finally, when we go to first class, it's really everything that's in the executive program, but now we're putting in audit support. This is for customers that are truly regulatory bound, and we may need to be part of that audit process to help them deliver and, of course, meet their regulatory compliance requirements. Now here we see regional rates from talking to our customers really anywhere from 150 to for VCSOs up to 2.25. You may be exceeding that. You may be below that, of course. And when you see the 2,400 to 9,000 a month there, it's really looking at that business through first class column. So 16 hours at that low end of 150 would get you a $2,400 contract. 40 hours at 225 gets you to that $9,000 contract. So your mileage will vary in between there. So hopefully today, coming out of this session, you're really understanding a little bit about where, hopefully at a bare minimum, where the TBR starts and where a 4-fee service should begin, and how to create monthly recurring revenue versus project revenue for these types of services. So you can really expand out and accelerate your MRR growth. And of course, in doing that, you're going to be able to do more with less inside your team as well. So with that said, I'm going to open up the floor for any Q&A you have. For those of you that are attending for the first time, Q&A is meant to be an Ask Me Anything session. So so it doesn't have to just be about the materials that we talked about today, but it can be about any questions you might have regarding VCIO Toolbox. I'll also tell you, as always, these videos usually get posted within 24 to 48 hours to the university. So certainly if you want to see this again or want to share it with any of your team members, you can look there. But I have an initial question coming in here that's unrelated to today's conversation, but certainly could be something that others are feeling. Is there a way to sort the recommendation section of the meeting view, similar to how we can filter the roadmap section? And the short answer for that is not yet today. We don't have filters for the recommendation section. That does kind of get handled in the roadmap section. The way that works is a descending timeline based on end date. So again, part of the art form of being a VCIO is also kind of setting priority and building your roadmap to that priority. That said, Brandon, we have had some folks that have requested some level of filtering there, and we are internally looking at where we might be able to build some filters into that process that might support people. Certainly one that came up was, just filtering down to high priority projects as well. But as of right now on that page, it's a static page. There's a lot of interactivity in terms of kicking off tickets, kicking off tasks, adding notes, and certainly updating your recommendations and the big one, getting adoption on those projects. But while that interactivity exists, we do not have a filter there. Any other questions, concerns, thoughts? Well, I know we're just crossing over the half hour. For anybody that does need to leave at this stage, please feel free to drop off. For anybody else that does have any questions, we'll come in there. And I just got a question that says, should we call ourselves VCIO or VCSO? Depends on, think about what I just shared with you there. What are the tasks you're undertaking? And that really should be what you are. But a lot of times when somebody's taking on both the VCIO and VCSO role, we'll bundle it under a fractional VCIO contract because we want to be that CIO leader at the table. If you guys do your research, do some Googling out there, you'll see a lot of times, and it's one of the biggest challenges out in corporate today, the CISO still doesn't get a seat at the C-suite table, even though they carry a C-suite designation. They're still reporting up through the VCIO. So if you think in those senses, you always want to be at the leadership position that the person across from you would expect to be at the table. Now, that said, you want to make sure when you're building your contracts or certainly your statement of works, but then your contracts, to designate what falls under kind of the VCIO side of things and what falls under the VCSO, because you're probably going to reach more down to your team in the VCSO role. You're going to need to bring in those analysts to feed you some of that information that you're then going to take uphill as the potential virtual CIO to work with your customer. So, again, that's my opinion, and it's one man's opinion only based on some of the, anecdotal facts I hear and some of the research that we've done. But if you're really going to take that leadership position with the end user and there is no CIO, I would take the virtual CIO label to the table, because they probably already think you're doing security, but I would make sure you're building in either exclusions for what would fall under your VCSO service, so there isn't a confusion as to what's being delivered. And then, of course, if you are providing those VCSO services, you may even want to bring in a resource to act in that role as part of a team-based approach. And if you guys want to learn more about the team-based approach, check out the Office of CIO training inside of our university. That's where we really talk about a team-based approach to all this. But, if you're taking that team-based approach, you might want to be the VCIO. That way, if you do need to bring an analyst in, you can bring them in with that CISO title. That way, they're kind of elevated into that status of being a leader as well. Any other questions, concerns, thoughts, folks, before we wrap up today? While I give you a moment to do that, I'll say, remember, join us every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon on the West Coast for these sessions. Again, oftentimes about tools within the system, oftentimes about concepts like this and ways to go to market. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in right now, so I want to thank all of you for joining me today. If you do have any questions that you want to take on one-on-one with me, feel free to reach me at bdoyle@vciotoolbox.com. I'll be happy to answer your individual questions and make sure that that they go answered if you want to keep them a little bit more private. But I want to thank you again all for joining me today, and I'll see you all again next week.